It's really great to kind of look out and see folks that to see folks I don't know, but also, gosh, Neil, to see you, that's a real treat, and obviously, yeah, Vandana Chitta in her new form, Kashanti Vajra over there with the guitars in the background. Anyway, it's a real privilege and honor to kind of connect with you in this way. So I'm just going to share some of my thoughts with you about the topic. So I was just sort of thinking, what a funny time to be talking with all of you. It's slightly odd doing it on Zoom. Probably couldn't have foreseen that before March. Colchester's in level 2 lockdown. Wales is going into a circuit breaker, which is a full lockdown on Friday. I know Manchester's up to level 3 lockdown. And in a way, the pandemic isn't quite ceasing. And there are real rubs and there's real tensions in livelihood. There's real tensions around health. There's an increased sense of social injustices. We're in the middle of Brexit still. Obviously, there's climate change. So there feels like there's a lot going on. And today, been listening to, we're trying to catch up with Courageous Conversations. So strong stuff going in across the world. So it feels a real boon to be joining you this evening, to have the privilege to do that, to be trying to look at our experience, whatever that might be, from more of a dharmic framework in the complex world that we're currently finding ourselves in. And for myself, it feels like I've been in a bit of a cremation ground, kind of like a bit of an ongoing cremation ground. So for some reason, I sort of had it like, come July, my life would carry on as usual. I'd sort of, when it all kind of hit really fully, I thought, yeah, by July, get sorted, get back on track. And yet here we are, at great distance from all of you. So yeah, just to say, what is a cremation ground? So cremation ground is a crucial situation where we've been called to meet our limitations and work with them. Maybe situations where we react, where we feel defensive, where we're up against something. And all of these, we're told, are great opportunities to look a bit more deeply at what's going on. So, I guess the call is, there's a heroic call for whatever's going on, and some of you might be just doing brilliantly, some of you might be having a tough time, but whatever it is, we need to take that onto the path and use it as a source to reflect more deeply on the Dharma, to reflect a bit more deeply on the way things are. So I was sort of thinking about joining you tonight. The brief Anavajja gave me. I've also been thinking, on goodness, on ethics. I've just been thinking that possibly for some of us, at least, if not all of us, that we need to keep our inspiration and our vision close. So in a way, what keeps us going when times are tough? And just what keeps us going anyway, so we can come from our depths. So thinking about joining you tonight, joining Anavajja's course, seeing the lovely team hosting us. I recall coming, as Anavajja said, to the Colchester Buddhist Centre. I think it was in 2000, late 2000. It feels like a bit of a lifetime ago now. And I was definitely looking for something, and something had really been activated in me. I'd seen the film The Matrix. Some of you will know this story very well. And towards the end of that film, there's a scene of just deep interconnectedness. And it activated something in me, which is why then I kind of went looking, or actually ended up going to the Colchester Buddhist Centre, even though I wasn't looking to be a Buddhist, actually. But this scene activated something in me of what I believed was deeply possible, that somehow We are all deeply interconnected. You know, and in Buddhist language, sometimes it's spoken about as like breaking down the subject-object divide. It's possible to live from a deeper sense of meaning and connectedness. So this this knowing, or this vision of recognizing this division, you know, so there's me here and there's you guys on the screen. You know, I just really wanted to look at that much more closely, to really look at my experience. And the Buddha has given us a handy teaching. I hope you might have some sense of that, a path of ethics, path of meditation and wisdom, and how they come together. So at the root of some of our suffering, at the root of some of our cremation grounds, of some of the things that we're up against, the root of that is this sense of separation. So some of the divisions, some of the violence, some of the difficulties we come across is because of this sense of self and other. And that manifests in our mental states, you know, even in subtle ways of aversion, of ill will, or of greed, consumption, and that naturally then translates into our actions. So as Buddhists, as practicing Buddhists, we're moving towards a vision of enlightenment. So I remember the first conversation I had, actually Amlakitu's here. So the first conversation I had was with Amlakaitu about this experience of seeing the movie, and about this sense that enlightenment was really possible. So in treading the path together, we are trying to develop in a way what we talk about, this develop our consciousness, develop our awareness, develop this self-reflexive consciousness that's able to kind of look back, able to kind of even catch in the moment what's going on, where our actions are springing from, where they align more with our values, and where they don't. So to look at our relationship with the world, to look at our relationship with each other, we are really talking about our ethical practice. And as practicing Buddhists, trying to go for refuge to the three jewels, we are explicitly committing ourselves to becoming a moral agent, to cultivating ever more skillful actions of body, speech and mind. So we salute the shrine, the three jewels, in terms of acts of body, speech and mind. Because if we don't, in a way, we have something that continues to spring back to ourselves. It's a bit like a rocket orbiting the earth. So we're here because we have seen something. I've had the opportunity of sharing my glimpse of a vision, this vision of deep interconnectedness, of something going beyond myself and knowing that to be true. But you've had that experience as well, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And Vasantra, a Buddhist teacher within Triratna, sort of says we're trying to go beyond the ego project, you know, of me and mine. I find that really, really helpful. And Dogen talks about it as enlightenment or awakening being intimacy with all things. And I just find, yes, you know, like my being says yes to that. Just keep a little eye on time. So in 2009, as Anavajja said, I was ordained into the Triratna Buddhist order. I was given a sadhana. As she said, it's a visualization practice of Avalokiteshvara. And sadhana means way to the goal. So dun, dun, dun. I've got myself on speaker view. Yes, so Stiranagas very, very kindly put up a picture. This is a picture that we have at Tiratana. It's a gorgeous kind of image. I've taken the picture, so it doesn't look that great, but you get the sense. So that's the picture of Avalokiteshvara. Stiranagas kindly sharing. So the name Avalokiteshvara has a meaning. Ava means to look down. Lokita is a verb which means to observe or look. And Ishvara means Lord. So it's the bodhisattva that looks down, the bodhisattva that notices, the bodhisattva of compassion. So he notices the dukkha. He notices the suffering that's created when our world narrows down around me and mine. and he wants to help. So you'd notice two hands at his heart hold the bodhicitta. And Bhante describes the bodhicitta as a non-egoic stream of energy directed for the benefit of all beings. So a non-egoic stream of energy directed for the benefit of all beings. And hopefully I'll come back to that and we'll get kind of a hint of that. So he holds the bodhicitta at his heart. He holds a desire for awakening for all beings, the possibility of enlightenment for all beings. And he embodies wisdom and compassion that takes us beyond this subject-object divide. So if you know the puja, if you're familiar with the sevenfold puja, it's in the Heart Sutra bit where we talk about the bodhisattva of compassion. That's Avalokiteshvara that we're talking about there. So when he meditated deeply, saw the emptiness of all beings. So talking about this relationship, how do we come out into this kind of vision, moving beyond this kind of ego projects? Well, ethics is a clear way of doing that. So for Buddhism, it's a way of what we could describe, Dharmadasan talks about it as right relation in this complex world. So our ethical practice takes us out in a way of relating to one another, how we would naturally if we saw things clearly, truly, accurately, if we saw this bigger picture. So you might be very familiar with these lines from the Dhammapada, which I hope kind of point to why we're looking at ethics tonight in line with receptivity. So the Buddha says, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with an impure mind, suffering follows even as the cart wheel follows the hoof of the ox drawing the cart. And it goes on to say, experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind. If one speaks or acts with a pure mind, happiness follows like a shadow that never departs. So obviously the Buddha is sort of saying we create our world. And what's really helpful when we're talking about Buddhist ethical practice, what we're talking about is that of intention. So we're looking specifically at the mental states behind the actions that determine whether the action is helpful or unhelpful, that determines whether we're going to add to the suffering in the world or add to happiness in the world, whether it's going to lead us to freedom or towards greater bondage. So I hope you have some sense of the 5 precepts. So we've got a little slide for the 5 precepts. Sorry, I haven't cued Sriranaga very well around this, but there might be a slide coming up just in case to remind you. And Sangharakshita, the founder of the movement, has really encouraged us to focus on the positive precepts. So I just thought I'd share those with you. And just to say, these are principles and not really to be seen as rules. They point to a fundamental truth, which is what the Dhammapada verse is saying. When we speak and enact with a mind imbued with kindness, with a mind orientated towards generosity, orientated towards stillness or truthfulness or mindfulness, that will lead to our heart's release. It will lead to freedom. We'll be moving in that direction. So it's not about rules being imposed outwards. It's about us looking at our actual experience and seeing the effect of that. So what we try and do with this practice is we're trying to awaken our own ethical sensitivity. And the point of it is to help with samprajanya, with this kind of continuity of purpose, which can allow us to integrate at deeper and deeper levels, gather ourselves up, and allow a clarity to come from the depths. So although we might not be able to live those precepts out fully, and we're kind of breaking them in a way all the time, using it as a dharmic framework is essential, because if we're not doing that, we're kind of sleepwalking through our lives. It's a bit like walking kind of in the dark, or rather walking where you think you know where you're going, but you don't really, you know, so we're a bit more on autopilot. So we have the 5 precepts. But when you're ordained, or if you ask for ordination and you want to pursue that journey, you take on the 10 precepts. And I was lucky enough to be at Vandana public ordination, where I saw her doing that. So we're talking about ethics, but the practice of ethics takes us to enlightenment. But an enlightened person would spontaneously act in line with the precepts. So yeah, it's worth saying. So when I was thinking about ethical practice, and obviously the theme is, let's check the time, yep, the theme is receptivity, I was kind of thinking, right, link it all in. Well, I think I have got a good link in. I think it does link in. But I was sort of thinking, how do we take our ethical practice deeper? How do we really work with this Samprajanya? Well, I was sort of thinking there's like this, these almost, I was sort of thinking we could explore receptivity. So there's a receptive dimension, and there's also an active receptive dimension. So I didn't quite want to say a passive and an active, but it's a little bit like that. So in our receptive dimension, we're really just trying to be aware of what our experience is. So we're trying to notice the mind, notice any reactions, notice thoughts, notice emotions. We're trying to be receptive to our intention, what this momentum that we're bringing into being. And there's quite a knack, in a way, I'm sure we know that in our meditation, you know, there's quite a knack to noticing and in a way kind of being with experience, which is quite different to being lost and carried away with our experience, and in a way deepening the grooves, maybe of aversion, greed, delusion that underpin unskillful acts. So this receptive aspect, turning up to our experience, involves us having a sense of the quality of our mind, whether it feels bright or dull, whether it feels closed down or starting to get tight. So we can already start to kind of move into the ethical feel. So we need to feel our way into the precepts. And every time we kind of get caught in a very negative narrative, or even act out of that negative narrative, when we look very closely, often our sense of self solidifies a little bit more. You know, it can be quite enticing and quite enchanting, but actually when you look at your experience, and the Buddha says do look at your experience, we can feel more constrained, we can feel smaller, we can feel hemmed in, almost imprisoned in our mind. Yeah, so we're trying to be receptive to what our experience is, and this receptivity in a way also allows us to catch what's coming in from past experience. So we kind of we become more aware of the fruits of our previous experience. We also talk about that as karma vipaka. So often our fresh experience is being conditioned by what has gone on before. And then this active dimension of receptivity, on the basis of that awareness of knowing a bit more clearly what's going on the basis of that, it's almost like we can really start to make a choice of how to act. So if you're really into the wheel of life, we can start slowing down the wheel of life almost. On the basis of being aware of our experience, we can start to transform it. So it's quite easy to talk about self-metta, but where self-metta leads us, it isn't necessarily a feel-good experience, but it moves us out into objectivity and into a kindly sense that when we act from our better motivations, and the knowing that sometimes we don't, sometimes we can, and sometimes we don't manage it. So it's not about getting it right all the time, but it's almost like this active dimension to receptivity is a bit more like knowing what to do when we don't quite line up to our values. And that ethical sensitivity can really help us with that. So we can't always catch it in the moment, but we can often come back to that. And what I found very helpful when talking about ethics, my own experience has been like this, but a really good friend shared that she can get into almost two polarities, or into kind of two kind of views. So on the one hand, she said that she can end up feeling like, hey, I know about ethics. I can tell the difference between right and wrong. I'm pretty okay, really. And actually, I'm more ethical than quite a number of folk that I know. So it's helpful to see, you know, what arises even talking about ethics. And then on the other hand, she said she can get into another pole, or another tendency can come up when we kind of catch where we fall short, where we catch where you think, oh no, I didn't do that again, did I? Or, oh, I'm going to have to go and sort that out. So basically, when we acted against her own better values, gave way to that irritation, spoke out of anger, sometimes she could fall into a sense that actually she was so deeply flawed, she was hopeless. You know, give up on me, leave me behind, go ahead. So it's almost like these two poles. It could be summed up as I'm fine as I am. The other one could be kind of summed up as I'm hopeless. So anyway, you might have obviously your own conditioning and your own views around ethics, and a sense of your own poles, really. Maybe that isn't the case, but anyway, it's worth looking at. However, it's good to know with kindness, with awareness, our views can be transformed, whether they're ours or whether they come from the past, or whether it's the views that society we're breathing in. And the answer to both of these kind of tendencies, I'm fine as I am versus I'm completely hopeless, is really to allow ourselves to see really that we are process rather than a fixed point. So seeing much more deeply ourselves as a process rather than a fixed point, either higher or lower than others. Yeah. And I just want to say that spiritual friendship has been a really important part of that, actually. You know, Anavajja spoke about our friendship, and actually it's really very much been a two-way thing. And Anavajja had given me some feedback around my communication. Found it very, very helpful, actually. So friendship is really important. It's really important that we take ourselves on. It's also really important that we let each other in, because both of those tendencies can make it very hard to really get into dialogue. And I was just sort of thinking for myself, actually, it can be very hard to change in a vacuum. You know, I've been really grateful to be reflected back, to be seen in my heights, but also with my working grounds. So it's just interesting, do we relate to each other on the subject of ethics? And it's really ethics that supports our Sangha as a spiritual community. And interesting, coming along, the first session that I did at the Colchester Buddhist Centre, Harsha Prabha was leading the class, and it was on ethics. And I remember having a bit of a row around the first precepts, around doing harm, and around a hot topic around abortion as well, you know. So they are strong areas to really explore. But I hope you're getting a bit of a sense. Am I doing? Yep, I need to be ending. I hope you're getting a bit of a sense of the practice of ethics helps clean and in a way purify almost what I want to describe as our life stream. It helps cultivate a momentum to our being. A way of orientating ourselves towards how things really are. Yeah. And what that does is it can end up taking us out into wisdom and compassion. So our ethical practice can really help us work against this deeply held delusion that goes very deep, that there is somehow a fundamental fixed self that either that isn't okay, or that doesn't quite change, or we can't quite imagine can kind of change, that there's a real me in here and an objectively existent world out there. And it goes very deep, actually, this kind of delusion of our life. Life as we experience it often is an embodiment of that delusion. But we do get glimpses, we get moments where actually that it isn't quite like that. We know there's something more. So what's exciting about the practice of ethics is it can take us, so we often talk about karma niyama. We can work on actions having consequences, cultivating our ethical sensitivity. And then we start to get glimpses of what lies beyond that. That it's possible to awaken. So the practice of ethics is really around awakening this Bodhi heart. Avalokiteshvara holds the bodhicitta to our heart. So ethics moves us into a real solidarity. It's essentially an imaginative act. And Bhante talks about almost 3 levels to our ethical practice. So the first one is it's in our own best interests. When I act out of anger, often someone shouts back at me and it's quite painful. So he almost talks about the first level is it's in our own best interest. We suffer when we don't behave in ways that are more skillful in relation to others or even in relation to ourselves. Then he says there's a second level where we start to feel more empathy with our own suffering, empathy with the suffering of others, where we start to realize we're not so separate really. And then the third level he talks about is this spontaneous ethics. It's the Buddha is naturally ethical, doesn't train in being ethical. So with ethics, we're really kind of cultivating our capacity for awakening in the world, for not doing harm, for acting from and within this almost matrix of relationships. So it really is a path of freedom and growth. And I hope I'll be able to get that across. So for me, coming back to Avalokiteshvara, Avalokiteshvara embodies in a way deeds of loving kindness. He embodies cherishing others. He embodies that kind of dichotomy of self and other being radically transformed. So true compassion comes out when seeing that the true compassion comes from seeing the true nature of reality. And compassion is a strong heart wish that we alleviate suffering in the world. Compassion means to act, actually. And it's this very feeling that motivates a bodhisattva to Buddhahood. So I was sort of thinking that I experience Avalokiteshvara, this force of good, as being compassion, but actually Avalokiteshvara is the embodiment of love, really. And the spontaneous compassionate activity takes place when there isn't a reference back to self. The spontaneous compassionate activity is free even from the distinction of self and other. So the more we practice ethics, this solidarity with life, this fruits into this momentum of wisdom and compassion and takes us out into a selflessness which breaks down the subject-object divide. And that manifests in the world as this compassionate activity. So sort of thinking, you know, we practice ethics not necessarily to be good, not even maybe just to make the world a better place, but to purify the quality of our being so that we and others can be liberated from samsara. In a way, that thousand-armed form that Stiranaga shared with us is so that we can even be a hand, we can open to being a force of good in the world. So folks, that's what I want to say. I'm about a minute over. I'm going to stop there.